The Burrows of Berea is a conversational podcast. We study the Bible and we talk about it.
Not all of us are of the same faith, and one of us doesn't actually have a faith.
And that's wonderful. We all love one another, and we're going to continue to talk about these things.
The things we believe in and the things we believe about what we read in the Bible. Not all of these are necessarily true. Some of it is opinion and speculation. Thank you for
listening and speculating with us.
There you go. That was good. Yes.
You are listening to the Burrows of Berea.
Welcome back to the Burrows of Berea. I am Rick Welch, and behind the glass is Rocket Man Andy Bishop.
It's me.
It's me. This is going to be kind of cool. This episode is really cool. So it's another part of this testimony series that we did at Berean Bible Church in Virginia Beach. This is an unusual one. We actually had a married couple. It was Jeffrey and Veronica McCormack. And Jeff McCormack is the associate pastor. He's an elder at that church. He's like an associate pastor. He does some amazing talks. He really gets into like some deep stuff like the apocalyptics, like the sun will be darkened, you know, and he gets into what it means. He does a great episode on Calvinism versus Arminianism. Like, he's a great guy. But whenever we went down there, his wife kept talking more and more whenever he was talking. And I was like, why don't you just join in, you know? And that it just so
that's
happened.
Cool. That's smart.
Yeah, it's whenever you were driving back to Draft Studio. And so me and Ralph were just sitting there. We were like, why don't we just do this as kind of like a thing? Because they fell in love when they were in the military and all that. I don't want to get into that.
Sure, yeah.
We'll just let everybody hear it. So I hope you guys enjoy this one. So Jeff and Veronica McCormack, thank you guys so much for being on the podcast. And I have to say, this is the first time we've ever done a testimony series with the married couple. So I'm expecting a lot of sparks or fireworks or fire. Something, I'm not sure, but and happy anniversary.
Thank you.
Yep.
Today is your anniversary.
Yep.
Isn't that cool? Everybody give them a hand. Yeah. If you can hear that in the background. Yeah, we are actually recording live. Well, not recording live. We're recording live here, but it's
on the day it's recorded.
On the day it's recorded, it's live in front of a studio audience, in front of the church. So it's really cool. And thank you guys so much. So
that's the preterist view of life.
The past?
the preterist view of
life. Yeah. I thought you were saying everything was in the past. So let's start with you, Jeff. So I ask every guest, and I'll ask this of both of you, though, but I ask every guest at the very beginning of our testimony episodes, can you tell me your earliest memory when you heard the name Jesus Christ?
You know, I've heard you ask that, and I've kind of pondered on the idea. So it was obviously preteen, but I don't have a recollection of exactly when. My early childhood, my parents were divorced when I was like about 9. And I'm assuming a lot of the memories I have are just pieces. And so I may not even have them all right, but I think I blocked a lot of stuff out. I remember, and I wish my parents were still alive to ask them why, or if this is really the case, or did I remember incorrectly, but I remember going to church as a preteen. I don't remember going to church with my family. I remember being put on a church bus.
Oh, wow.
And being sent to church. I don't ever remember sitting in a pew with my family. We were in our family was, I know now in later times that my mother's side of the family, my grandfather was a elder in the church later in life. So they came from a religious background. I don't think my father's side so much. So my mother probably had a lot of influence there, but I have a lot of memories of individual times with my parents, but not a whole lot of family time. I see pictures of all of us together, and I'm like, I don't remember that. I remember being there, but I don't remember being with my parents. So anyway, I don't know when it started church-wise, but I do remember going to church as a preteen. And then my parents divorced when I was around 9, or that's when the divorce was finalized. And then my dad got remarried or got hooked back up, started dating a woman that he dated years before he was married. And she was a churchgoer, big time. And so now she took us back to church. So now around the age of 9, I'm going with her to find a new church because I'm the littlest kid who could be drug around. And so we started going to church more regularly at that point. Southern Baptist, typical Southern Baptist stuff. And so while I know I used to go to other churches and other Baptist churches before that, that's when it got serious. Mm-hmm. And now the family went to church. So I would have to kind of pin it to that. But yet, in that same time frame, I still remember going to like youth things at a different church before that all started. And I do remember one time hearing the message and it's talking to me. And I didn't go forward. And that plagued me for the longest time. I thought I missed out my chance. I'm going to hell now. So I was at some youth thing, and we were, playing games, and then had a little talk, and you need to come forward. And I'm like, I need to go. But you're scared. You don't want to step out on all your friends and everything.
Sure.
And I thought I'd lost it at that point. So anyway, that's some of the early memories I have of seeing, that whole scenario and being involved in that. But so they would have been somewhere in those, probably before age of 9. And then we started going to church more frequently. And I know by the time we were 10, 11, I know it was 11-ish, we were really involved in this church. And I think it was around that time that I did walk down the aisle, did the typical, how many times are they going to sing Just As I Am before I finally get the nerve up to go down there just as I am. And I went down and I pray with them and blah, blah, blah. And they give you a little Bible and they have all that stuff in there. So got kind of serious. I know, and it's funny, and again, if you listen to Bob's before mine, we're all obviously recording these at the same time, but people aren't going to know if they didn't listen to them in order. But
and I decided to release all of these in order so that, because we keep referencing the previous ones, so we're just going to release them all in order.
I'm going to have to do that because there's been a lot of good points made. And something Bob just made in his previous one was the whole thing, and this is the early 80s, so this late 70s, early 80s, rock music was a thing. Mm-hmm. In the church. It was because rock was kind of new. Well, I went to church. I was a good kid. I didn't drink, didn't smoke, didn't hang out with girls that did, whatever that thing goes. I was a good kid, but I listened to secular music. Mm-hmm. I had it. So I knew in the back of my mind, at least, that was my vice. That was the thing that I listened to Kiss and all the hair bands and all that stuff. I never listened to the satanic stuff. There was blatant satanic stuff. Never got into that. It was always just a typical sex, drugs, and rock and roll, cleaner, party music.
Cleaner sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Got it.
Not satanic.
Right, but it was clean sex.
Right, clean sex,
Got it.
Yeah. Between mutual married couples.
Is that what Kiss sang about?
Got it. Kiss sang about. So, for instance, like when I was in there, I went through what the Baptists had at that time called CWT training, continued witnessing training. And I was one of the young people that did that. And you learn how to witness, and then you go door to door with, like the Mormons and them do. You go with somebody else, and you witness. And I remember we had all the workbooks we had to do, and one of them was something about a vice or something that inhibit you. And I remember putting in there that I listened to secular music. That was my weakness or whatever. So I knew there was something there, but whatever, that was what I was, and went to church and all that, and played softball and did all that stuff. So I could say I was brought up in the church because I don't remember what life was like prior to the divorce, but I just know that occasionally I was in church either by myself or with my cousin of my same age with no parental guidance, sleeping in the pews and going to Sunday school and RAs and things like that back in those days.
Right.
And I wish I could ask my parents, why did you all put me on a bus to church and not go to church? Some of that would have been before and after the divorce, because I know we'd go visit my mother and then the bus would pick us up, but she wouldn't go with us, but we'd get put on the church bus. Mm-hmm. And maybe I'm the youngest of 3, maybe my older brothers were there. I don't recall ever going with anybody. So
I have a similar part of my testimony. I was on a bus ministry too. And I got sent without my parents.
Yeah, I guess it was a thing back then.
Back in the 80s, it definitely was. You just let kids go wild on buses wherever they want to take you.
But it was, it was nice. And like I said, we did a lot of youth things. And so I was really involved in the church. Maybe didn't know to what extent I believed. That was how I was brought up. So, mm-hmm. But yeah, it was sometime in my early preteens or early teens where I actually kind of made that decision to be more, we were really involved and stuff like that, did the whole CWT training and all that. So you learn a lot of the, defending the faith and some of that stuff. And that would have lasted all the way through my teen years. And oddly enough, today is also the 38th anniversary of the day that I left home to join the military. So
oh, wow.
It was right after my birthday. I got on a bus and joined the military. So all of those teen years, I was the clean kid. I never drank, never smoked. I just listened to rock and roll. That was kind of my thing. But I was always, perfect little angel, like my mother said. Ever since I was born, I was her little perfect angel. So I left and joined the military. And
The audience can't see your wife laughing right next to you. Just so you know.
yeah, good thing this is not a visual show.
Speaking of,
Yeah, back at you.
Yeah. So anyway, I guess that's the early years.
Dead.
Not like I say, not a whole lot to report. It was just kind of like living. Can't say I was the most, obviously didn't like read my Bible all the time. I knew what I believed and I knew what they taught, but can't say that I was, real in-depth type thing. So, but continuing on join the military, you go out there and of course now you're a single guy with no car, living on base on the dorms, and you go to church at the chapels and it's a mixed bag of, you don't do that very often. It's just like, okay, I'm not getting anything here. So then you fall into that, I'm not going to church anymore, and so still was the good guy, still was I could be the designated driver at all the concerts we go to and stuff, and I was. So then that would have been around the time that I met my wife. Of course, not at the time she wasn't my wife, so we met while we were in the military. So
That would be a great time for me to bring Veronica in now, since that's where you get to that point. You're the clean cut, you're the
Good
military,
guy.
you're the good guy. And so I'm going to start with you now, Veronica. Let's go way back.
Okay.
So, or however long back, I don't know when. The first time that you heard the name Jesus Christ, can you tell me when that was?
Well, I grew up and my parents were divorced as well. And we lived with my grandma. And we were a Catholic family. So I grew up Catholic and my grandma took me to church like all the time. So I can just remember, going to the Catholic church. So I guess I heard the name a lot as a child, but
in Latin.
Yeah.
How do you say that in
I
Latin?
didn't really speak Latin. But so I grew up Catholic, and in the place where I'm from New York, and it just seemed like everybody was Catholic. Like I didn't know anyone who wasn't. And like in my school, I think we had catechism every Tuesday night. And we would have to go to our Catholic church and have like a catechism. And if you wanted to be confirmed and do the Catholic tradition of confirmation, you had to go to catechism. So everyone I knew at school was at, catechism on Tuesday night. So it just seemed like our whole community was pretty much Catholic. And the only there was a few Jewish kids in our class, and then one Christian I can only remember one girl was a Baptist, and the only thing I can remember about her was we were getting prepared for a school dance, and she was helping us decorate, but she couldn't come. And I was like, why can't you come? Well, because I'm Baptist and we're not allowed to dance. And that's the only thing that I had ever heard of any other religion and not understanding, why can't you dance, So I didn't know anything but Catholicism. And then I joined the military right after I graduated too. So in basic training, I guess I'll try to lead up to where we meet. But so I was in basic training, and that was in Texas. And now I'm running into people who aren't Catholic because I thought the whole world was Catholic. I didn't know any different. And
Makes total sense.
Yeah, it's really funny. Does. So now I'm being surrounded by people who are witnessing to me because, they were Christians. And I'm like, I don't understand. Why are you fighting with, I'm Catholic. And they were like, no, you're not a Christian. And it was really interesting. So there were a lot of people who would confront me and I would argue with every one of them. So I think I spent my whole basic training arguing with Christians because I was like, I don't understand. And then we went to tech school, and those same people followed me to tech school and more. And so Here I am again, surrounded by tons of people that are always witnessing to me. And it was like, I can't get away from these people. And one of the things that bothered me the most was, why do you think they would say, well, I have a relationship with God. And I was like, well, why is your relationship better than mine?
Yeah.
So it was always like, like this confrontation, and I would fight and argue. But I can remember being in Texas and realizing that there's no Catholics here. So I guess that's not the most, biggest religion of the world or
Not
whatever.
in Texas.
No.
Chase them out.
And then, so the neat thing was after tech school, I got stationed at Keesler Air Force Base, which was where he was already at. And again, all the people that, we were all in different tech schools and things. And I'm thinking, oh, goody, I'm going to a new place. And sure enough, all those people who were witnessing to me were there too. I'm like, I cannot. One of the funniest things was one of the people who witnessed to me the most. His name was Mike. And, we argued a lot. And so I get to Keesler, and me and the other person I was in, this was like part 2 of my school. We're in school. Anyway, we go to lunch and we sit down at the table, and there's Mike right across the table from me. And my friend Rich is like, oh, you remember Mike, don't you? And I said, yeah, the religious guy. And kind of rolled my eyes because I'm like, here we go.
It's kind of cool that a Catholic girl was calling him a religious guy.
Right.
Yeah,
that's
really
true.
wild.
So, here we both are at Keesler, and then I meet my husband here, who's also a Christian.
Yeah. Was he a religious guy to you?
We had a lot of arguments.
Yeah, so she gets added to at this point. So I was there before her, a couple months before her, and then she comes, and a lot of the people she comes with, the guy part, are in my dorm. So then I'm friends with them, and then I meet her through them because she was at Texas, not the religious ones. These are the just normal people that I ended up meeting. At this point, there were some that were not as Bible thumpers as we're saying before.
Sure.
They were just people. I ended up being friends with them, which then incorporated her as part of the group. So now she's part of the group. There's no attraction here. We're just friends. But I'm Baptist, and she's Catholic. So yeah. And even though in my ignorance of what I knew at the time, still I knew that I was right and she was wrong. So yeah.
Yeah.
And there was one of the guys that was part of our group who was from tech school with her, who was also from New York, who was also a Catholic. So it was like me against 2 of them, and then you bring in other people, and
which just oozes romance.
It does. Like at this point, again, there was no romance. She was just part of the guys. We just
okay.
She was just part of the group, and and she was really only at this. She was at I was permanent party at this. I'm there until they move me. She's there for second phase training, so she's not going to be there long. So she's probably thinking she can escape finally, and so she's there for a while. She's in training, and then we do start hanging out, and we have the same shift because we both work in the hospital. We have the same shift, so we become really good friends. And again, no romance or anything. She's dating one of the other guys, but we're really good friends because he's on different shifts. So we're just all part of the same group. We all do everything together. We're good friends. She's giving me girl advice, things like that. It wasn't anything there.
Like listening to clean sex music by Kiss probably isn't the greatest idea.
Yeah. She liked some of that stuff, but she was more into 80s pop. So there was also that problem too.
It's all coming out.
Kiss can take down Hall & Oates any day of the week.
Guaranteed.
Duran this. But, and it was kind of, like I said, we developed a friendship bond. And I guess, let me see, was this before or after? Okay, so at some point, one of her other friends, he wasn't attached with her, Todd was already permanent party.
All right.
Somebody she worked with who was also a Christian. Him and his wife invited her to church. They went to a charismatic church. Now, at that time, I was back home here visiting on vacation. So I leave, everything's fine, blah, blah. I come home, there's a big note on my door, see me when you get home or something like that. Well, so I'm back, I'm unloading my bags or whatever, and she comes pouncing into my room. She's all dressed up. It's a Sunday night, I'm back off the plane, yada, yada. I went to church and got saved.
Really?
Yeah. So
She went. Go
yeah.
ahead.
So my friend Todd, who I worked with, was just taking. Yeah. At this point, since I had been being witnessed to by 100 bazillion many people, now I'm curious as to there's got to be truth out there. You know, all of us say we're Christians. There's Catholics and Protestants and Lutherans and Methodists and Baptists, and someone's got to be right and someone's got to be wrong. So now I'm exploring. So now I'm going 1 week to a chapel on base, and I remember visiting one of my coworkers took me to a Baptist church, and that preacher yelled the whole time. And I thought, oh my goodness, he's screaming from the pulpit. It was kind of scary. So I was like, I don't know if I want to come back here. But I was trying different churches. And so at this point, another friend from work, was taking a whole bunch of people to his church, which was more of a charismatic church. And coming from a Catholic background, I hate to say this, but that church was fun. You know, you sing and you clap your hands and you're like, oh, this is, kind of neat. And the pastor never really got deep into anything. So I never really learned anything. But 1 week there was he called himself an evangelist, a special speaker. And that was the week where he preached, and I swear it sounded like God was talking to me. And I always thought, I was a good Catholic. I was like him. I didn't, do anything. I was a good person. I thought I was a good person.
Sure.
And but then during this whole, sermon, I realized, you know what? I'm not as good as I think I am. And you feel that weight of sin. And I was like, and when he did the altar call, I had to go up. So I went up and I got saved.
And pretty much that was soon after that, I guess.
And it was like an immediate thing for me. My whole life changed. I started reading my Bible, and I was all excited, and he was on vacation, and so when he came home, I'm like, I'm a Christian.
She came in all filled with the Spirit, and and then of course that affected me because again, at this point you're on base. Now this is I've probably been at this base for 7 or 8 months. Not going to church. You don't have a car. You don't go to the chapel. You don't have any friends that have cars. So anyway, so she's like, you got to go back to church. So now she's getting on even though I'm arguing, theology with her. Now she gets on my case. We have to go back to church and get back to church. So we started going with this friend of hers, charismatic church. I'm Baptist. It was fun. I'm also a drummer. I'm like, I need to take that position right up there. They had a nice roll-in VSS and drum set. And I actually at some point did audition for the church to play drums. And it was a nice drum set. But anyway, we didn't stay there very long. We went there. It was not a mega church, but it was a big church. It was a pretty big church. One of the bigger ones in that area. And we went because her coworker was married off base and had a car. So we could go to church. He'd pick us up, we go. But that's kind of where we got. And then we eventually, of course, that would have been much later. Yeah, I don't want to jump that far ahead. But and then so now comes the time a couple months later when she has to leave. Actually, let me step back maybe a couple months before that. My parents come to visit us in Mississippi. Now we're in Mississippi. They come to visit us to go to New Orleans. And they get a hotel room and we're staying in New Orleans. Well, then they wanted to come see the base. So they came to see the base where I was at on like a Friday. Well, she comes popping over because she's off. We are clinical Monday through Friday. Her boyfriend or her friends, work different shifts in the ER. Well, she's free because it's the weekend. So my parents are like, hey, do you want to come to New Orleans with us? And again, we're really good friends. So she's like, sure. And so we get a cot and we go to New Orleans and we spend the weekend together. And then my stepmother, she's like, she likes you. We're friends. No, she likes you. Yeah, whatever. I know. Whatever. A week or two later, we were dating. So, but then that would have been maybe a couple months before now she's got to leave. So this is, I guess, how you make a deal with God. So,
Yeah.
It was kind of, I don't know what I was going through. I don't know what. We were barely knew each other. I mean, we're talking a minimal amount of time. Literally from the time I met her to the time she was leaving was like 6 months.
That was probably 8.
You got there like in April and you were leaving in
I was
September.
8 months training. That's all.
Okay, maybe it was a little early. Maybe I met her in April. She was there longer. But so I basically made a deal with God. At this point, I knew that the thing that was stopping me from being serious about my religion, my theology, my Christianity, was the secular music. So I said, I'll tell you what, God, I will get rid of my secular music if you'll bring her back to me. I chucked everything. Hundreds of vinyl records, which I now wish I had. But my whole collection went right in the dumpster out back. Everything that I had. I kept 2 albums, Stryper, 2 Stryper albums. The only Christian band that I had in my collection, which I had bought the previous year and freaked out about. I had heard Christian bands. Everybody's like, you need to listen to Petra. And I'm listening to Petra. And this is in the early 80s. Petra was like folk rock.
Yeah.
I'm like, are you kidding me? Put this up against Motley Crue. That's a joke. So I was so turned off on Christian music. I saw the Stryper album in the record store before I bought it, way before I bought it. And these guys look cool. They got the spandex and everything. You flip it over.
They look like bumblebees.
Yeah. I
Kind
saw
of like that shirt you're wearing.
Yeah. I flip it over and it says dedicated to number one boss man, Jesus Christ. Oh, put that back. Because I had not to this point heard any Christian music that was worth my time. It was not on the same par of anything I listened to. Probably a couple months later, I bought it. Absolutely. And devoured it. This was before I was a Christian. Before I got rid of my music. That album just blew me away. They were right on par with everything I listened to. So when I got rid of everything, I kept a Stryper album, that first one, and a single. They hadn't released a second album yet, which came out later that year. And then I went to the record store and I found some other albums that I could easily tell were Christian bands because of the way they looked and the way they songs, which included some bands that, later went on to be pretty big bands at the time, Messiah Prophet, Saint, some of these other hard rock bands at the time, Barnabas, Leviticus. Obviously the names give them away. Saint,
Yeah.
Leviticus, Messiah Prophet. So my record collection went from hundreds to about 5 or 6. And I started over. And the roommate that I was living with at the time didn't like that. And that became a hassle. So then she's gone now. I've made this rededication of my life and music. I'm not having good times with my roommate. Some of her friends that were these Christians that used to hound her at school, I became friends with now. And so I moved in with one of them as a roommate. I got to get away from my roommate and moved in with this guy. And we were the 2 Christian crazy guys. Mike led our Bible studies that I was now involved in while she's gone.
The religious guy.
All of her religious friends became my friends, and one my roommate. And yeah, it was. So in that sense, it wasn't like a conversion experience, but it was a life-changing experience. I went from one type of group of people to another group of people, music and everything. So I listened to Amy Grant and Imperials and stuff like that, and Stryper. And was playing drums and started jamming with the guy, doing Christian rock stuff. And again, she's still gone, but we're still in communication. So this is when the relationship started growing, because now we're not physical around each other. We're not physically around each other, but we're on the phone all the time. And we really didn't have much time. We never got to the point where we had much time to really have, there wasn't a real physical relationship. We dated for a little while, and that was about it. She's gone. We're on the phone. It's growing into a deeper friendship. And you were gone for what, at least a year. She left in September. And I know it sounds crazy when we do the math now. Literally, I met her like in April. She left in September. We were married by the following July. Yeah. We were together. There's maybe a month or 2. She was gone from September till we got married. And then past that, because they didn't put us together in the military till the following May. So were we really, does that year count? Or, we were not, we were married but separated. But all that time we spent getting to know each other on the phone all the time. So that was, and then finally she did come back to my base later after we got married, about a year later. But during that time, I'm playing drums and I'm playing with other Christian musicians, and we're playing Christian band stuff and striper stuff. And hey, my friend's like, hey, there's a band playing, some band Risen Rock playing at the chicken place down the street. Let's go see them, you know. So then we get on there and we see this long-haired guy and they're playing Christian rock and Daniel Band, all these other bands, Striper and all that stuff. They let me sit in with them and I play a Striper song on drums. Mind you, I've been playing drums about a year at this point, so I did okay. But so now we hooked up with these guys and they're a Christian rock band. They're like, ooh, you know, big famous thing. Saw them a couple times over the years. Then started a Bible study with these guys and gals and people like that. And that's around the time when she came back. I got an apartment. She came back. My roommate that was with me, the Christian roommate that I was living with, got married right after we did. We got married in July. He got married the following February. Apartment upstairs, our apartment downstairs, his wife and him. Anyway, so we lived close to them still, you know, real good friends. Started a Bible study with these other rockers, you know, Christian rockers, whatever. And at some point, we were like, there's no place around here for Christian bands to play. And we found this building in town that was burnt out. Somebody had stored paint supplies there. It was a big open room, 2-story building, and they stored paint supplies. It caught on fire, burned the entire floor out. And so we got this idea of buying this building and turning it into a Christian coffee house. The downstairs is this big open room, and all of our bands can play here. And so we started doing this, and we all just started working, tearing walls out, putting sheetrock up and all this stuff. And during this time, we're doing Bible studies. And by the time the building got to where it was almost finished, we had decided to start a church. We still played music, but it was like we were learning things, and she would have been back at this point too. So we're learning stuff in this Bible study that is bringing us into a different view of where we all are coming from.
Yeah, we started with church history.
That's where it started.
We studied a book that went through church history.
We went back into early church history. Now, of course, we're going to a charismatic church, but of course I'm Baptist, she's Roman Catholic, but and other people are the same way. And in church history, some of the first things we started seeing were the things that we were being taught in the charismatic church. Those ended. You know, we started seeing this in history. This is stuff that was already being poo-pooed out at that point. They weren't, you know, church history was acknowledging this stuff as being gone. It started shaping a lot of things. Then we started going into later history, and we get into the Puritans and all this stuff. Now, none of us have this background, but by the time this was done, we were serious enough about things so we were like, let's start a church. And then we started reading books by like, what was that book? A.W. Tozer. No, A.W. Tozer, the Knowledge of the Holy. Sovereign grace, you know, but maybe not all the way, because his view of God's sovereignty was like a dog on a chain that could go anywhere he wanted, but, you know, or people on a boat could go anywhere they went on the boat, but the boat was still going. He was trying to describe it. It was kind of there, but it was a starting point to get us into. Then we started getting into Reformed Baptist stuff. Stuff from up in New Jersey, Al Martin, Walter Chantry, people like that.
And this is happening at your church?
This is the Bible study that we're doing.
The Bible study before the church starts.
Well, we're kind of in the format of making a church. But we're studying this stuff in our history and Bible studies and ultimately decide, by this time we're still working on the building, we're a little small group. Anyway, yeah, it turns into a church. We become Reformed Baptist.
Okay.
This is a whole different world from anything. So now we're not, you know, and in that we're also moving away from dispensational trains of thought. We start looking at more of I guess at that point, kind of a post-millennialist type stuff. I remember one funny story, because we all still came from that background, dispensationalism. I'm talking to the guy who's kind of like the leader, and we're talking, and I can see that we're swaying away from the dispensational stuff. She comes bouncing in. I found a new scripture for the rapture. Honey, stop. I don't think we believe that anymore. Shh. It was great. We lost some people at this point because there were some hyper spiritual people that stopped coming because the spiritual gifts are gone. It started getting serious. That's at the time, I think, where Christianity became real for me, because now we're dealing with deeper stuff. Now we're reading the Puritans. Now we're reading heavy Reformed material. Now, you all had mentioned in one of the previous ones, if they've listened to these in order, about the Bible thumpers and the people and how Calvinism, when I say Reformed theology, of course, I'm talking Calvinism for those who don't know. Calvinism frees you from that, being that person that's always a Bible thumper. No, when you become a Calvinist as a young age, you become obnoxious, and everybody has to believe what you believe. Mm-hmm. I remember it was Douglas Wilson, another Reformed author, who made the comment. He says, anybody in their early 20s that becomes a Calvinist needs to be chained up and hosed down for a couple years before they're allowed in public.
Wow.
And it's true. Truth's the form. Now, at this point, we became Calvinists. Now you're headstrong. I know the truth. You don't. I'm going to show you the truth, and everybody you talk to now becomes a target, including my former Air Force roommate, who we're still good friends with. Now he's living in Connecticut. We're living in New York. This would have been a couple years later, but I'm one of those obnoxious people that's trying to shove it down his throat. And he told a friend of his who got back to me that something like, I'm not going to talk to Jeff anymore because he thinks he's better than me. And that was a wake up call. Mm-hmm. Then you realize that the humbling effect. So, but yeah, that was a comment, you do become Bible thumpers in a worse way. But yeah, so we did that, and the church, we even met in the building when it was falling apart and it was cold, and 3-hour sermons, and went through the book of Titus at least 5 times, just because it seems like every time we tried to get out of it, something happened. The pastor had to start over. We elected the one rocker guy to be the pastor, and it was a great time. Small group like we have here. I mean, but we were serious about the word. We were serious, and we were listening to tapes by people, biographies, Spurgeon, everything we could get our hands on by every organization out there at that time. Mount Olive Tape Library in Mississippi had a massive amount of Reformed stuff. And so that's where we cut our teeth and came together on that, in our early married years. So Roman Catholicism, Baptist out the window, because now we're unified in this one thing. And you got anything to add to that?
No.
We did that for a while, and then eventually went back to where she's from in Long Island because of her father's sickness and stuff. And so, but then we came back to the same church. So we really spent a lot of time in Mississippi. We went through the whole King James only thing. And actually we did a book burning where we burned all of our other Bibles.
Yeah, it was bad for a while. We were all King James then. We had to sing a cappella.
Well, that was it's a little later.
Music.
Let me just tell about the story about this. So we sat around in one of our long sermons, and
I got to stop you. Did you say you burned other Bibles?
Hold on. Yeah, let me tell you this. Hold on. We sat around and had a circle study on the Bible translations.
Yeah.
And I actually have the tapes of these from back in the day somewhere, and we called it Twisted Scriptures. Probably from my Twisted Sister days back in the 80s. So, and a lot of it was probably based on, what's the guy's name from Florida? Whatever, he was a guy that was big into that. But yeah, we became King James only. And so we all had different Bibles we read from. I brought my book. I had gotten the book. Pat Robertson's the book. We all brought different translations. We sat in a circle, read all these verses together, and laughed at how bad they were. And then we took them out in the not a dumpster, we had a barrel, because Mississippi, everybody has a barrel that burns stuff in the yard. And we burned all these Bibles. So yeah,
we were bad.
We were bad.
We became.
But then later, the further we studied, then we became head coverings and
we're head
acapella
coverings.
only, went into some of the more stricter side of Puritanism and all that stuff.
It was hard, and it was really the acapella. Well, then the pastor
exclusive psalmody acapella.
Yeah, and then the pastor decided that you couldn't listen to any secular music at all.
Well,
then it was no Christian music either, because the lyrics were not good.
Not reformed.
And it was getting to the point
but he didn't enforce this on everybody. It's kind of like he's doing it, so you feel like maybe you can So he started listening to a lot of classical music, which I did too. I like classical music. She hates it, but I still listen to the Christian music, so it wasn't a big deal. And he's back into that now. So,
but you were playing in a Christian band, and
I was playing in a Christian band. It wasn't It wasn't like the church said you have to do it this way. Anyway, put it that way. We went away to New York for a little while and stayed with the Reformed church up there. Then we came back. Now, the other thing about that church, we started off Reformed Baptist, and then at some point, he came to us, and we had a meeting afterwards, after our meeting, and he's like, I've been thinking about this whole paedo baptism thing, children baptism, infant baptism, whatever you want to call it, Presbyterianism, because you've got two sides of the Reformed view, Presbyterian Baptist. There's really no other. So, this is what you kind of look at it. And he's like, so here's all the people that we know that are just our regular Baptist views. And he has a list of paper, and it's got Spurgeon and all these people. Here's all the people that are Presbyterian infant baptism. Flip, 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 flip. Just pages and pages and pages of all the people we read books by that were Reformed. So then we made this big discussion. One of the guys in the church his father was a Baptist minister, so now they're arguing. And so we just listened to them argue, and we're like, yeah, good point, yeah, good point, yeah, good point, yeah, good point. By the time this multi-hour meeting, the women are in the other room, the guys are in the back room arguing. By the time this multi-hour meeting was done, most of us came out saying, I'm Presbyterian. And so the church changed to Presbyterian. So now we're Reformed Presbyterian. So, of course, the other thing that spawns that is if you are Reformed Baptist and you go to a conference where there's Presbyterians, they're going to mob you, just like when you are not preterist and you go to a preterist conference. They're going to surround you and try to convince you the whole time you're there. And our pastor went through that when he went to a Trinity Baptist conference in New Jersey or whatever. So, yeah, fun time, just so many fun memories. But out of that, it really grew us into a love of church history, a love of reading, heavy into Reformed doctrine. And that was really what kind of spurns you into being a more serious Christian. And that's kind of where, and like I said, we were doing it together, so it wasn't like we had to convince each other at that point.
How did that all lead you to preterists?
All right, now we're getting into that. Okay. So,
Because all the way up to this point, it's just no problem. Been real simple, right? It was no problem. You started burning Bibles.
Yeah. First you're trashing records. That's
right. Yeah, and that was a promise.
We didn't burn them, but you trashing records.
You trashed the records.
Now you're burning books. So what's the next step in a cult like that?
But I will say though, I was really dispensational. And I was the last one.
I've got a new rapture verse.
Yeah, no, I mean, like when they were all already post-millennial for like probably 6 months, and I was fighting them tooth and nail until, what book did I read? What good Reformed post-millennial book? And I'm like, I guess I've been wrong all this time. So I'm always like the last one to be convinced of anything. So,
and of course,
but I do study because I don't, either, I want to prove myself right, which is, not always a good thing.
Right to divide the word.
But, so I do the studying, but I was the last one to come to post-millennialism.
Of course, some of the other things we were studying back then, which this is right up Dave's alley, is one of my favorite books was The Gospel According to Jesus with MacArthur. Yeah. Oh, did it? It was highlighted with all the good verses. That and Walt Chantry's Authentic Christianity, which was against easy believism, similar stuff, lordship stuff. Those were the early days. Heavy Reformed, heavy that. Then I started getting into Stillwater Revival books out of Canada. Used to put out a lot of they'd reprint classic books, and I was getting amillennial books, post-millennial books. There's like an amillennial book, I think it was just like something about the Lord's return. That's when I started looking into some of the eschatology and started getting into running across some of their people. Bonson was one of the first ones, because Stillwater's used to put a lot of Bonson stuff out, Greg Bonson. Great apologetic, partial preterist, blah, blah, blah. Along with him came one of his students, Ken Gentry. You start learning about that. You hear about the Gary DeMars and stuff a little later on in life. So Stillwater's was putting out this stuff, and so I was buying stuff from them. And that's where I had a Bonson cassette. I remember vividly, it would have been early 90s, 94. We were living in New York, which we moved back to New York around that time. So I know it was then. I remember getting a package in the mail of tapes from Stillwater and listening to this tape by Bonson on Armageddon. And in that, he mentioned the word preterist, and then he defined it. I remember driving down the road and stopping at a stoplight and writing on the envelope that the big package came in, preterism equals past. So that was a start. I never heard the word, but that started me down the road. Eventually, Stillwater got rid of all of that because they 100% preterism came from the Roman Catholic Church and whatever. They totally went on that, but they fed me all that stuff with all the Bonson stuff and all of that for the longest time. So I was getting into partial preterism. I was reading a lot of that stuff, and then at that point it would have been all the early stuff by Gentry and House Divided by, against dispensationalism, because we were against dispensationalism, maybe didn't know exactly where we stood. So that's when it started in the early 90s for me. And all this time, backing up just a little bit, in the late 80s, because I was only listening to Christian music, I started a magazine promoting Christian music, reviewing Christian bands, because Christian music, Christian rock was starting off. And so bands were putting out cassettes. They weren't getting major labels. But I also thought, I can, in my magazine, put hardcore Reformed theology, because these people are a bunch of Arminians, because you got to convert them, because you're right, So I would put music reviews intertwined with multiple articles on heavy Reformed theology. My ministry was to infiltrate Christian rock circles with that. After a few issues, I gave it up. We had kids. I stopped doing it. Then after the first kid was a little older, I started doing it again. It was called The Pendragon. Then I started as just a newsletter without the music. And I brought these you can't see these because you're not here watching this, but these are some old copies of the magazine, of the newsletter. And you can see where I'm starting to go with this, because like in this January of 96, I have an article on how history and Bible interpret, basically basic hermeneutics, and how you have to understand the Bible in the first century context. So now this is January 96, which is also the year that we started the website for the Foundation for Biblical Studies, because I had just learned how to do webs. The web was brand new. People were just getting into it. We launched it. I remember it said, how many people visited since January 96? So did this in March of 1996, it was a 2-month newsletter. Hope for the Future, an Introduction to Postmillennialism by Veronica McCormack. This was a big struggle, because she's like, should I write? Should I, women teaching men, yada, yada, yada. But so this is where we started with getting into the postmillennial things. I was selling brief books by, some of the people in the early days, Vic Lockman, Bonson, some of that stuff. That, I guess, and being on the internet then got me into this newsletter, which you can't see, people who are not here, but April 97, the International Preterist Association. Little newsletter, and then on the inside it says, New Preterist Ministries, Jeff McCormack in Massac, New York, promotes preterism on the internet. Now, mind you, this would have been partial preterism. They have Gary DeMar, they have R.C. Sproul, they have people like that in here. But it's funny, because on the same page over here, you got Mike Sullivan from Citrus Heights, California. So me and Mike, we were partners in 97 in a newsletter.
Really?
Now.
That's wild.
No, it gets wilder. Jump ahead 2 more issues. August of 1997, same magazine. Welcoming the new Preterist Ministries. David Curtis. Chesapeake, Virginia. David began a new church, Berean Bible Church, which now has 10 families. After he found some rejection from a former church, as he now has just recently accepted the preterist point of view. So here's a newsletter with David Curtis, Mike Sullivan, and Jeff McCormack.
Wow.
California, New York, Virginia.
All happening simultaneously.
And now and a lot of other names in here that people we all know, but they're not in this room. But I found this a couple years ago in my collection. I just thought that was cool. And this was before Mike was here. It was like, look, David, me and you were in a newsletter years ago. But because of me writing all that and getting on that, I got involved in preterist circles, which got me on newsletters like The Kingdom Council by Ed Stevens, which was an early preterist thing. This is 94, so I know at that point I was in there. And Ed started sending free books. Everybody got a copy of the Perusia because he put that out. That book got a free one. Everybody got it. I got these books. I kind of knew what they were about. And like David mentioned in his testimony, they sat on my bookshelf. I am not touching that stuff because that's not good.
Right.
But I'm going to keep it and collect it until one day. One day I'll study that. So it was a while. I don't think I finally picked up any of those books until right around the turn of the century, right around 2000. I remember, okay, let's look into this. And I don't know, I can't remember what prompted me. At this point, we're back in Mississippi. We went to New York. We came back to Mississippi. And I read books that Ed had sent me. All the ones I read were by John Noe. So if you know he's written a lot of books back in the day. Can't say I totally agree with where he's gone now, but back then Ed printed a book on his called Shattering the Left Behind Delusion. Of course, Left Behind was a big movie, big book. It's clickbait because the book's not about Left Behind, but it's about the resurrection and stuff. Read that. I read another book which is brought up in one of the other previous testimonies where they talked about how the atheists use these verses against us. I think it might have been Bob or whatever. John Noy wrote a book called Dead in Their Tracks. And that it was a small pamphlet, then it became a bigger book. That book changed my life because he talked about Bertrand Russell and how Jesus had to be wrong.
Right.
And he proves they weren't.
That's right.
That book, okay, I'm done. And now I start bringing it and showing it to her. This would have been, and by that time, we're back here in Virginia. I'm reading these books still, early 2002-ish, and I'm showing her, and she's like, yeah, whatever. But I'm reading that stuff, and I read another book by John Noy, on the big one on the end of the world or whatever. Great stuff.
Well, I think, though, at this time that I was a partial preterist because our church was kind of teaching that we were going to a Reformed Presbyterian church. So I was fine with partial preterism. And so I was like, oh, cool, the destruction of Jerusalem is what the book of Revelation is really about. So that was really neat. And then he starts talking about full preterism. I'm like, what's that? Then he's trying, then he's telling me, that Jesus came back and it's all done. And now I'm worried. Oh no, my husband's a heretic.
I do think at this point I wasn't quite there, but I was open to it. And she was
so he's talking about, well, I haven't made a decision yet, but I'll let you know. And I do. And I'm thinking to myself, well, I hope he comes to his senses because, obviously that couldn't have happened. I think my biggest stumbling block was the creeds. Mm-hmm. How could we be wrong for 2,000 years? Why the creeds? Why didn't anybody else figure this out? So for me, the biggest stumbling block was the creeds and the fact that how could the church be wrong for 2,000 years, So now he's studying, and then he decides one day in the car to tell me that, well, I don't know if you're going to like this or not, but I think I'm a full preterist. And I'm like, oh no, my husband's a heretic. So at this point now, I have to figure out how I'm going to bring him back to the faith, I guess, which is what Glenn mentioned before. So I decided I'm going to have to go study this a lot and figure it out. And it was the same thing. You have all these points and you go and you start studying the Bible and you're looking up and you're reading books and everything I thought, was a problem with full preterism. I was wrong. So I was like, oh, great. I guess I'm a full preterist now too, because I couldn't prove it wrong from the scriptures. And I went back to confessions of faith. I was doing all kinds of stuff and just studying the scriptures and realizing that the scriptures prove that, full preterism is right. So
one of the pivotal books in her, which I was surprised, I still haven't read the book, but the book that she came away finally and said, I
give up,
was Jesse Mills' Daniel Fulfilled. She read a book on Daniel and she came away saying, it's true.
Yeah,
and Jesse Mills was in that newsletter with my name too, so he's in there. Anyway, but Ed Stevens printed his books too. So I was being fed all of this from Ed Stevens. He even fed me the first copy of the Book of Enoch. So, hey, we'll take down that path, and it's all Ed's fault too. At this point, so now we're kind of believing it, but we are going to a Reformed Presbyterian church across the water here. I have a bookstore. I'm selling books online. I start adding Don Preston books, but I've also still got, I'm carrying it all. I'm an all-purpose preterist. So Gary DeMar, Ken Gentry, Don Preston, everybody. So, because I don't want to reveal that I'm either or, I'm just, hey, it's anything better than dispensationalism. Let's put it out there, right? So, and I'm doing that, and we're going to this church, and everything's fine because I'm not a Bible thumper when it comes to preterism. I'm not preaching it to the other people. Then a friend and I start a podcast where we're talking about all things covenant, including covenant eschatology, which I know is not the greatest term because it's not the term that we would necessarily hold to now, but it's good at the time. Covenant communion, covenant baptism, covenant eschatology, covenant theology. And we would have people from different positions on the show. Because a lot of Christians, as we know, will just hear what their pastor says. So-and-so believes what? And they're told what so-and-so believes, but they won't go to the source and ask what so-and-so believes. At the time this started, one of the big things in covenant theology, one of the big issues in the Presbyterian Church was the whole federal vision thing. This is 2002. This is when we first moved back here. So this is 2004, 5, 6 when we started the podcast. It was a big thing. The church was dividing. I won't go into all the federal vision is. I was at the conference it started at. I recorded the conference. I didn't see what the big issue was, but it became a big issue. But nobody wanted to hear what everybody was saying. They're like, oh, they're wrong. I'm like, well, did you ask them what they believe? No, but my pastor said they were wrong. So I'm like, okay, I have friends in the federal vision movement. I'm calling them, hey, get on our podcast. We want to hear from the horse's mouth what you believe. And then I started going, hey, Don Preston, we want to get you on the podcast to hear from the horse's mouth what preterism believes. And we invited people to not call in, but send your questions. We're here for you. You ask the questions, we'll ask the people. We'll take it to the source. That was our goal. And we had people on about communion. We had people on about baptism, everything covenant related. Eventually that show fell apart. And I had, at this point, had already been somewhat convinced, yet not loud-spoken preterist. The show kind of fell apart. Some bad things happened. I was told to my church leadership, they went to them and said, hey, did you know Jeff's a full preterist? Now, we were teaching Sunday school at the time, so then the church launched an investigation. They came to me and they're like, my elder came to me with a new elder. I hear you, blah, blah, blah. And is this what you believe? And he's like, yeah, I do. And the guy kind of shook his head. He's like, the guy who told him about me said you probably would backpedal. I'm like, no, this is what I believe. Okay, we're going to investigate. They didn't know a whole lot about it. Can you write your testimony? They got a lot of stuff from me, books and books. And they assigned it to this new elder guy. I felt bad for him because I'm like ringing him through. I don't know if they read anything. I don't know if it all ended up coming out to where they're like, look, and I'm telling you, I've got the most different preterist testimony than anybody that y'all are talking about being kicked out and everything. They came to us at the end and they're like, look, we love you guys. We can't let you teach anymore because we're Presbyterian, and the presbytery would come down upon us for letting you teach. But we love you guys. We're not going to bar you from the Lord's table. We're not going to call you heretics. We're not going to even ban you from talking to people. If you want to tell people about it, that's fine. And the guy who threw me under the bus ended up leaving because
he was mad that we didn't get kicked out. And they said, as a matter of fact, you all can do anything you want in the church except teach. You can even join any committee you want in the church. So I joined the Sunday school committee, which chooses what they teach in Sunday school. And the first thing that I chose, that I helped push them into choosing for the adult Sunday school, was Gary DeMar's Matthew 24 series on video, which does not divide Matthew 24. But and I couldn't teach it, so the teacher who did teach it, of course, says, I'm not really sure I believe in that. He's trying to counteract it. I'm just sitting in class going, no, But anyway, it was a grand time as far as a testimony for that. Now, at the same time we were doing the radio show, I thought, hey, what if there's such a thing as a preterist church? Google, preterist church. There's one in my backyard.
Wow.
Berean Bible Church in Chesapeake. What? A church? It's preterism? So this would have been 2006 or 7. So I call him and I'm talking to him and I found out he's Baptist. I'm like, oh, okay, well, whatever. But we're involved in this church who, at this point, the controversy was probably just around the time, not quite starting. So I felt we were in good with the church. Didn't want to leave the church. The kids were involved in the church. I thought, yada, yada. We were there in the church. We didn't leave. In 2008, I came and visited when Berean Bible Church was at the YMCA. She was out of town. I went there. Fine, neat little church, but we were still involved in our church. Then around the 2009 era is when that whole throwing under the bus thing happens. And we still felt, because they loved us so much and they kept us, we couldn't really just leave. And so it was about another year after that we finally made the decision, because then they got this building. And I remember calling Dave once and I'm like, we didn't want to leave the church. I said, why don't you all do a midweek service so we can come? This is selfish of us. We don't want to come to your Sunday service, but if you all have another service we can come to, we'd like to fellowship with other preterists. And they did. Started a Wednesday service. We came for an entire year. And then eventually our kids are like, why do we not go there all the time? the church that we went to is 40 minutes away. Well, we thought y'all had friends over there and didn't want to leave. No, we don't like
care.
those kids. We don't know those kids. We don't
like those kids.
They had no ties. They were having fun here where there was no kids. And so we said, okay. And we made the switch and we started coming here at that point in early 2011, about a year after they did it. So, and again, we didn't cut ties with the other church. They understood. Our elder tried to talk us out of it just because he thought we were still in the wrong, even though his wife read all the books from me and she thought we were right. But they're not together anymore. But anyway, it was a
So you broke up their marriage.
probably.
Got it.
I don't
Got
think
it.
so.
It was all done lovingly, and again, we were not cast out. So I would have to say that is the oddest preterist testimonial that we.
That's like, I think it's wonderful to hear that.
It is.
Because that's what
Yeah.
we need more of that actually in all of our churches too.
Yeah.
And what was sad though was it was his best friend that threw him under the bus to be
We won't go into that,
with.
whatever.
But yeah, so we lost a few friends over it, but
I think
not at least the church at least took our side.
it was a bit tougher because of the timing, because this happened in early 2009, and in May of 2009, our son passed away. And I kid you not, and that's the weird thing. David and Kathy came to the funeral. We hadn't seen him since we did see him. I went to a Bible study early 2009. That was it. Yeah, I know. Hey, you got two of us in here, so looking at his watch. They came to the funeral. That was kind of cool, and that's when we started kind of questioning things. But about a week after the funeral, this friend of mine comes to me to have me repent. Get out of my house. This is not the time to deal with this.
Right.
Yeah. So a lot of things were done and said at the wrong time, at the wrong type of, and there's been no communications. Well, the communication that took place after that was him bad-mouthing me on the internet, but that's, whatever. So there was some recourse, but not from the church.
So from this entire time that you guys have been talking, I know we've been joking around and laughing, and that's great. But for anyone that's listening to our podcast that's either new to the Christian faith, or maybe they've been in the faith for a long time and they're in a dispensational church or wherever they may be, what kind of advice would you give them? And I don't mean preterist advice. I just mean advice. You went through this journey, and to me, I think that's what we all are sharing. We're figuring out that all of us are on this different journey, but we ended up at the same place. So what advice would you give to young people that they feel like, oh, I don't know if I really want to, I'm afraid. I don't know that I really want to step out there and read this. It's a different doctrine, oh no. What would you say to them?
Well, and I think we all talk about that, how, you've got to be a disciple of the word. You can't just be stagnant. I have friends that I don't think they've ever grown an inch in their Christian faith from the time I knew them 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Read a book. I mean, challenge yourself. You've got, like David said in his message, when the elders wouldn't even touch the topic, that's sad that you're not even willing to refute it. Let's talk about and refute it. We did have one episode where we tried to switch churches before coming here because there was a church closer to here. They had no clue what preterism was. The same guy that I was doing a podcast with, he goes in there before me to be examined for new memberships. And then they asked him something about preterism. He said, yes, I'm a preterist.
He pretended he was.
And then he leaves, and then I come in. Now the table's been set. Are you a preterist, Jeff? Yeah, I'm a preterist. This is not something you're going to bring up at a church. I'm not hiding it, but on the other hand, now it's an issue. Now they don't know what to do. What do? They don't want to sit down and talk about it. They call all their pastor friends. And then they call you back. No, it's bad. It's a heresy. You're out. They didn't tell us we couldn't join, but they told us we can't even confirm you're a Christian. So why would you want to come to this church if we can't confirm you as being a Christian? Why would you want to fellowship with people that can't claim you to be a brother in Christ? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, look, we didn't come here for trouble. This would have never been an issue. I would have never preached it. We had been going there for months. Never was a topic. It wasn't a battle a hill I was going to battle on, but I'm not going to cause problems. So we went back to our other church, which of course at this point, did you know Jeff leans that way? So they already kind of knew where we were. But the problem was when I was set to start teaching a Sunday school class, and my friend is like, should he be teaching? He's a full preterist, blah, blah, blah. So they had to pull the plug on that. So, and then it became an issue. But, so they didn't know how so that's an example of how churches don't handle it. They just don't want to, they close their mind to it and they don't want to do it. You can't do that. You've got to keep studying and you've got to challenge yourself because otherwise you're just following tradition. And accept where it leads you, and hopefully you won't have a bad story.
Yeah.
But for us, it went from being just your typical pew sitting Baptist to being charismatic to being Reformed Baptist to being Reformed Presbyterian to being extremely Reformed with all the extreme Puritanism, and then eschatology, and it's a learning process. And like David said, half the stuff that I believed when I was a Christian, I don't believe now.
Yeah.
I can't say that I hold anything I held to when I was 18, 20, 25, 30. It changes all the time.
You would say you were just as saved back then as you are today,
yes,
correct?
Right. It's yeah. No, I'm more saved now.
Well, I guess that's the point, is for anyone that's willing to take the risk to study, read a book, to challenge
and they
themselves.
have to read the Bible, like our pastor says. You have to read the whole Bible, not just the New Testament, because you have no clue how it connects to the Old. It's really important to read through the whole thing, as many times as you can.
I think for us, it was a gradual thing, because when you go from, you can go from being dispensational to being anti-dispensational without really being anything else. You have to kind of see the flaws in one system, and then you can eventually figure out where you fit in. You go through that phase of, am I a millennial? Am I post-millennial? Whatever. And again, that's what I'm saying. When you start sharing preterism, they're like, well, what about this? Okay, look, what about this was what I studied 20 years ago, and it took me 5 years to get there. I can't tell you. You got to build up on this. I built up on this over the past 25, 30 years. I can't just unload this into you. And that's what's the toughest thing about trying to share anything. Same with Reformed theology. Yeah, you can teach them the 5 points of Calvinism, but you really got to kind of build up on the history of it, and which is why I gave that message on the history of it.
Right.
Where'd these 5 points come from? Well, they came from these 5 points. It's hard to unload on somebody that's not a close friend over a long time period. It's hard to have a meeting with somebody and convince them of anything. But you've got to be willing to do the study and do the work and, read the scriptures and see what they say to you, and maybe read some other books that might help you along the way.
Yeah, I always hail back to what it must have been like to have been a physical disciple with the physical Christ here on earth, and to see all the things that he did and to hear all the words that he said, knowing that he said that, hey, take up your cross and follow me, or that he was going to die and resurrect in 3 days. Like, they heard him say all these things. They were with him. They saw him, every single day for 3.5 years. And then after he dies, they just go back to fishing, and to me, it's like they saw him, they were with him, yet they were like, all right, well, I love it in the King James version. I'm not King James only, but King James says, Peter says, I go a-fishing. That's what he did. And he went back to his old way of life. But then it's not too long after that, of course, he's standing at the temple in Acts chapter 2, after the Holy Spirit has come, after that they've been able to understand the scripture.
Go ahead.
No, that was it. I was just saying, look at the disciples' lives. It didn't happen overnight for them.
Right.
And they were with Christ walking. And I know we have Christ within us, but I'm just saying, for them, we who live in this literal flesh world that we're walking through right now, it doesn't surprise me that it takes a while to pick up on some things. You got to put in some effort. Those people left everything that they had for him. We can't just give him 5 minutes of our time and think that we're going to get it all. We actually have to work.
And there was a lot of unlearning too, because we're not all King James anymore, and we don't wear head coverings anymore, and we listen to music now, and there's a lot of things that you think are right, but
are you still burning Bibles, or?
No.
That's good. That's good. The non-inspired version.
Actually, it was funny. My cherished, I had an NIV that came out around the time that they came out, was 80 something, 84. My parents bought it. It's got my name engraved in it. That one actually wasn't at that meeting, so I still have that. It didn't. My book got burned, but anyway. The thing I would say for people, you were asking about advice, and this comes with maturity, and you can't really, you're not going to, it's hard for younger people to do this, but you learn after you made so many changes. You have to not be afraid to change, but then when you do change, don't feel you got to go beat the world up about it. Everybody is on the path, right, and everybody's at different places. And what I believe today, I didn't believe 20 years ago. So I don't expect you to believe what I believed because you're where I was 20 years ago.
Right.
And so the toughest thing for people to do is to keep it to themselves, and wait for the doors to open. Wait for somebody to be there. Instead, I became reformed. Everybody had to become reformed. And I'm going to tell you that I'm reformed, and I'm going to tell you why you're wrong. And when you become a preterist, a lot of people are going to be like, you're wrong. And they go online and they fight about it. Let the people, love people. Don't shove it down people's throat. Don't become that Bible thumper. And that's tough. Everybody's prone to do that. When you know something new, you got to tell the world. And sometimes zeal without wisdom becomes obnoxious, and you lose a lot of friends and people like that. We continue going to these churches without making one single wave. Mm-hmm. If somebody asks us, we're going to tell them. But I'm not there to convert everybody to what I believe that took me 20 years to figure out, because you're not there. If the topic comes up, I might give you a little bit, feed you a little bit, and bring you on the road. But I can't expect you to be where I am, at this point. And
Ralph, this, we always come to this. It seems like every episode we always come to that very end and we say, it's back to the loving one another,
Absolutely.
Love you where you are.
Yeah.
That's what Christ did. Christ loved you and he brought you in, and then he said, and go sin no more. He didn't beat you over the head and say, how dare you, and all of this, and then do this. He loved you. He came, met you where you were. He wasn't in synagogue. Christ was on the streets with the people that needed him, and he loved them. And then when he had them, that's when he said, now.
Yeah. Well, I can't tell you how much it means to me that you guys were willing to be on our podcast. It means a lot. I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings in this room, but you were the first person that I saw, and it was about the sun will be darkened. It was about apocalyptic literature, and I was like, who is this dude? This is cool. I'm all about it.
Now, I want to say something about that, because you came to me at the conference. And I have to apologize because I don't.
Because you were super rude to me, or
yeah, exactly.
Feel free to apologize. I'm just kidding.
He comes to me in between sessions and he sits down in front of me and says, "You're the first person." This is not me. I'm like, you must be talking. David's over there. He caught me off guard. Man, I love you. I saw your thing. You introduced me to this, and you're really great. And I just want to come say hi. And I'm like. Deer in the headlights. I don't even know how to reply to this.
He literally was like, whatever, bruh.
What? Oh, yeah. You would think I'd be over with all the fans I have as a rock star, but
right.
For the theological rock star side of me is different. So it caught me off guard. I'm blah, blah, blah. What do? I felt bad. And so then for like the next few sessions, I could go talk to that guy again, because I felt like I just totally... Deer in the headlight, didn't know how to respond. I'm like, I've never had anybody come to me and say, I saw you first. And I was like, okay, cool.
Yeah.
That was...
that's really where it started. And when I saw that about apocalyptic literature and about the sun will be darkened, and it changed my life. And that's why I wanted to come down. Of course, I continued to watch, and I saw Mike and Bob and David and all that, and so I really got into it.
I was first. Hear that, Bob? Mike,
if it hurts your
feelings.
Hey, just remember, David's back there thinking, he's not talking again.
Chalk that up as one of mine. I brought this new member, family.
Yeah, absolutely. But
Put that notch on my belt.
Anyway. It was all good until
you hadn't been kicked out of a church yet.
Yeah. You were number one until you said you really liked Kiss. When you said you liked Kiss, I was like, No, just kidding. No, but thank you. And actually, this was the first time we've done a testimony, like I said, with a married couple. I think you guys are precious, and I really appreciate you guys sharing with us. And, tell everybody about us, will you? Like, tell everybody about what we're trying to do. It's not just education. We want everybody to know that, you're out there, and you're stuck inside of some sort of a cultish type world. There are books, there are people. Challenge yourself, go after it, learn more, and just there will be people out there that you can find that, like I have. I've been fortunate enough to find all you guys here, and I suddenly I'm not alone. This is awesome, So tell everybody about the podcast, man, and that way that we're going to send them back to you guys. That's all we're going to do. Cool.
Yeah, Glenn and David got it right. Read and ask questions.
Yep.
Don't be afraid to read and ask questions. Yeah,
absolutely.
Don't be afraid to question tradition. And that's exactly what my podcast was about. It's like, questioning traditions. I mean, our little funky thing at the beginning, our trailer, now that I think about it, it said, have you ever questioned your traditions, where they come from?
What do you want to have, like McCormack's Main Street right next to Crookshank Corner? We'll put all your old podcasts on there.
A lot of them are out there online still, so yeah.
Are they?
I'm sure all of my old pastors, if they ever listen to any of these podcasts, would go, Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That I'm starting to do this because of all my questions. I could see them saying, yeah, okay. For him, I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. Well, thanks again, guys. I really appreciate it. And I guess what we'll do now is just take a 10-minute break, and then we'll start the next one.
So that was pretty cool, wasn't it, Andy?
I can't wait to hear it. I have not actually heard it yet. I will edit this later, and I'm sure it was, though, the way you talk about it. I look forward to it.
Just having those two sitting there giving their testimony and watching Jeff. Jeff begins to cry, because he talks about how he has all these records. He was talking about all these records that he had, all these rock records, and he loved them. And, he falls in love with his now wife, but then it was just this girl, and they're both in the Air Force together, and she gets called away, like he says, she gets called away, and he's just like, I will throw all of this rock, this hard rock, this devil rock, or whatever you think it is, in the dumpster if you'll just bring her back. And he throws the stuff away, and she comes back.
Oh,
they bring her back.
Now I'm really excited to hear the story.
So we're just recording this after the fact, because we were so casual then. But anyway, so it's pretty cool. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that one. And thanks for being here, Andy.
Thank you.
And we will talk to you next time on the Burros of Berea. Hey guys, this is Rick from the Burros of Berea. Do you know how much blood, sweat, and tears it takes to make a podcast? None. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't cost a lot. And so if you guys don't mind, if anybody would like to give to help us with these episodes, it would be great. We'll put out even more content. And if you go to our Patreon page, just search for the Burros of Berea, you'll get extra notes, extra episodes, and it's pretty much free. $1 gets you a lot. Thanks, guys.